All right. Think we're ready. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Man, this is more complicated than I thought it was. But hey, I got it up and running. But yeah, we're all set to go. Sorry to keep y'all waiting. So as we get everybody started logging on, welcome to week 2, by the way, of the Digging Deeper workshop on the Enneagram. I have a question for you all, just to get everyone engaged and logged on. If you could have any superpower, which one would you pick? Which one would you pick? Yep, which one would you pick? Maybe flight? I don't know. You put your answer in the chat. I'm going to look at something real quick while y'all talk about that. Y'all doing good? Being quarantined and everything? Yeah? Sweet. Man, I have oh man, it's not working right now. Well, that didn't work. Okay. Sorry about that. I had a whole nother thing. My image isn't showing how I want it to show. Oh well, I guess I'm gonna be in that corner right now. Okay. Cool, we're already live, so we'll just keep going. Now you guys know how I do everything. Alright. So if you could have a superpower, I know there's a little bit of lag here, like 30-60 second lag. So sorry about that. I see there's Superman. Yeah, being invisible. Okay. Yeah. I like to play that game where it's like you share something that you would want to do, but then there's always a downside. I don't even know what that's called. But so let's say if you had the superpower of flying, you could say, okay, you could have that, but the downside is, you have wings, and one of them is clipped off, so you're just flying around in circles the whole time. I like to play that game, just because I'm always a pessimist. Oh, man, I have allergies, so I don't have the coronavirus, I promise you. Well, I can't promise you that. But if I'm coughed during this, it's allergies. I looked it up. I'm like 99.99% sure it's not coronavirus. Just a lot of allergies. This is going to be really embarrassing. All right, cool. Glad that y'all are on. Ray, you want the ability to morph and gain the ability of another for a period of time. Okay, and then Kristen, mind reading. That's pretty cool. Yeah, that's a pretty cool superpower. That mind reading superpower, though, that's comes with great responsibility, though. Great responsibility. Yep. So before we get started, sorry about a couple of things. I had this whole thing programmed to where it would be easier to read. Like, I would be off in the corner and the screen would be there. But once I went live, everything reverted back to normal. I don't know what I did wrong. So, so sorry if my face is blocking some of the images. So sorry about that. I'll try to tell you what's on the other side. But anyways, okay, so there's your first question. Now that a lot of people are on, good to have you on. Let's go ahead. Excuse me. Actually, let's talk about some prefaces. Okay, before we get into talking about it, because if you're just joining us, this is week 2 of the Enneagram conversation. Last week we covered just the entry level basics, just everything about just the basics of the Enneagram. So I addressed a lot of key concerns. Maybe if you did some Google searching, you figured out well, is Enneagram like in mysticism or New Age stuff? I addressed that in the last video. Bottom line, I don't think it is. Not a lot of evidence for that. And so we talked a lot about that in the basics. So if you haven't done that, you could watch. Of course, this is live, so you could watch this. But if you're watching this later on the replay, go back and watch the first video to get an understanding of that. Because today we're talking about more in-depth about the Enneagram and individually each type of the Enneagram types. So, but before I start off with the week 2 presentation, I want to make a couple prefaces that I forgot to mention last week. Okay, so first of all, I wanted to mention that I'm not an expert. Okay, I'm not an Enneagram coach. I'm not an official Enneagram expert. I've only read like 3 books on it and a bunch of podcasts and a bunch of things. I didn't address it last week, but yeah, I'm not an expert, but I'm going to come at it from a pastoral perspective, from reading different things about it, different perspectives. I'm basically taking a lot of what I've learned and compiled it into like my own little thing. And if you've gotten the spreadsheet, I've actually updated the Enneagram spreadsheet from last week. So if you have last week's, there's just little things that I've changed in that spreadsheet. So if you want to update to the newest one, go to the link that's listed in the YouTube description below if you're watching that, or on the fortress.church.online page. It should be underneath the video here. You could look at the different resources that I have here. Sorry, my throat is acting bad. Hey, wife. My wife is over here. Can you get me water? I forgot to get myself a water. My wife is so amazing. All right, so please download the new spreadsheets for that before we get started. Another thing I forgot to kind of mention, it was in my notes and I just kind of skimmed over it, but there's something known as the Barnum effect, if you've heard of that before. Basically, it's attributed to a lot of like horoscopes type of thing, but the Barnum effect is a psychological kind of understanding idea that if you get like a vague enough statement, like let's say a vague statement is, I think about a lot of things. It's like, whoa, you could look at that statement and say, whoa, that describes me so much. I think about a lot of things, That's kind of silly, but there's other vague statements like that. And a lot of it, maybe it's in fortune cookies. Maybe you look at the fortune cookies at Chinese restaurants and you're like, it gives you just a vague, description of what your life is going to look like. You're like, oh, that speaks to me so much. Or, it has a lot to do with horoscopes in that it gives you like just vague understandings of like, if you're like, I don't even know all the horoscope things, but basically the Barnum effect is a psychological idea that you attribute any of those things to yourself, if it's a vague enough answer, and it could be applied to anybody. So we got to be careful with that when talking about any other personality quizzes or tests or assessments, and especially the Enneagram, because there are some of them, maybe there's going to be a vague statement here or there. For instance, like the type 1 is, has an inner critic that speaks to them on different levels, usually bad, it's like, so it's not to say that everyone doesn't have an inner critic and only the type 1 has an inner critic. No, everybody has an inner critic. It's just that the type 1 is a little bit louder. You understand that the inner critic is a little bit louder for a type 1. And so we got to be very careful, because every type, we all identify, no matter what type we are, we all identify with some way, shape, or form every single type on the Enneagram scale. But it's just a matter of using wisdom and discernment, understanding which one it is, or maybe our top 3 that we have. But we don't want to make every vague statement like, oh, I think a lot of things, that means I'm of type 5 or whatever. No, we need to be careful with that. And so I wanted to address that with the Barnum effect. We want to make sure that things make sense. We're not just attributing random mumbo jumbo to our childhood wounds that we experienced at an early age. So we just gotta be careful with that. And I wanted to talk about just those quick things real quick. All right, so let's get started. Let me go back to the chat. Did everyone understand? I'm just reading a couple of things. Oh, Evelyn, you want invisibility. Okay. And then I don't know who Duck is, but you want super speed. That's awesome. Cool. Okay, those are your superpowers. Let's go ahead and talk about the first kind of section. I'm gonna talk about a couple more things, and then we're gonna get into each of the Enneagram types in depth. And I'm going to talk about that. So make sure you have that spreadsheet out because I'm going to be referring to that a lot. Okay? Make sure you download that spreadsheet, have that available. All right. So I mentioned it last week, we want integration. Okay? We want integration in our lives. We talked about that from the triads: head, heart, and body, and how we want not to just be one-sided and all head and no heart, or all body or gut or instincts but no thinking or feeling, right? We want to be fully integrated and integrated with the whole self and how Christ has called us to be. So that brings us to a couple of things, okay? When we talk about integration, you may have noticed on some of these Enneagram charts, maybe you noticed the arrows. The arrows point a lot to, let me explain it this way. As you can see in this little chart here, the green arrows are pointed towards a relaxed or integrated state of what that type would be. The purple is disintegration or stress. Okay, let me explain this. So, if you can see at the very top, there is the type 9, and you can see the green arrow is pointed towards, you see the type 3, and the purple arrow is pointed towards the type 6, okay? Now, what this means is that if a type 9 is healthy, I'm going to use the words healthy and unhealthy. Some people use the words true self and false self. I'm going to be using them interchangeably, but mostly unhealthy and healthy. I like that terminology a little bit better. But if a type 9 is really healthy, they are going to look like, as you can see from the green arrow, a 3. So they integrate or relax into a type 3. So if a type 9 is really, really healthy, you look like, if you're type 9 and you're healthy, you look like a type 3. But if you're unhealthy and you're stressed and you're disintegrated with your own self, then you start to look like a type 6. And let me just share a little bit additional information about that. When you are disintegrated into a type 6 as a type 9, okay, you look like the negative self, the false self of a 6. So you look at the negative attributes of a type 6, and that's who you would be if you're an unhealthy 9. So does that make sense? So if you're an unhealthy 9, you take on the unhealthy attributes of a type 6, and you start looking like a 6. So in other words, you start to fear a lot. You're overwhelmed with anxiety and fear so much as a peacemaker, and you can't make decisions easily, and you get so stressed out because of that, right? Because of that fear. So that's what the unhealthy 9 looks like. You look like an unhealthy 6, right? But if you're healthy, if you're a healthy 9, then you start to look like a 3 who is an achiever, right? And success driven. And that helps the 9 because we're going to talk about this in a little bit, but the type 9 is usually known as the laziest out of all the types. But if you're a healthy 9, that means you take on the positive attributes of a 3. And a 3, if you know the 3, is very hands-on, does a lot of things, and is the opposite of a lazy person, is a high achiever and motivated to do great things, right? And so if you're a healthy 9, then you look like a 3. Does that make sense? I just want to make sure that makes sense. If you have a comment or two, or if you have a question about that, please put that in the chat right now. I'm going to be looking at that real quick. So let me do another scenario, okay? So if you look at the type 2, let's look at the type 2, okay? As you can see, the purple arrow, the disintegration is pointed towards an 8, and the integration, green arrow, is pointed towards a 4, okay? So a healthy 2 is going to look like the positive attributes of a 4. A 4 is one of the most emotional types on the chart, and they use their emotions to drive their feelings, but more in a positive way. And so the positive 2, or the healthy 2 rather, looks like a 4. But if you're an unhealthy 2, you look like an unhealthy 8, right? As you can see from the purple arrow. So you start to be domineering and challenging people and debating and not really caring about people's feelings. You care about people, but not about their feelings, right? And you step on their toes and that's the negative attributes of an 8, right? There's a lot of positive attributes, but I just listed the negative attributes of an 8 because that's really how that works. Integration and disintegration, okay? Cool. Well, I think y'all are starting to get that there. And so because I wanted to preface that, because as we get into each type, I'm going to mention the integrated and disintegrated types, and you're going to see that in your spreadsheet. And so I didn't want that to go over your head, and I wanted you to understand what that means, integrated and disintegrated. So you'll see that in your spreadsheet and as we go on. So sorry. I promise I don't have the coronavirus. Okay, I don't promise. I'm 99.99% sure because I have a lot of mucus. I think they said that if you have a lot of mucus, then you don't have it. But hey, I could be wrong. Maybe it's okay because I can't transmit my germs over the mic. Then that would be really bad, right? So you're safe. Don't worry about it. All right. So any comments? I'm gonna read real quick. Nope, you're good. Okay. Cool. Okay, so next thing is I'm going to talk about upstream and downstream disciplines, okay? If you're in Refuge Youth, you know what I'm talking about, so you'll be like, oh, are you Pastor Mike? You already talked about this, but let me explain this in depth for those of you who don't understand. There's, as followers of Jesus, that's what we're aiming towards in this study. We're looking at the biblical themes. We're going to look at how each type affects us in discipleship to Jesus, right? So as we talk about that, we need to keep in mind upstream disciplines and downstream disciplines. Here's the difference between those, okay? Upstream disciplines are disciplines that are a little bit harder to do. So think about a river, okay? In a river, if you want to go downstream in a river in your inflatable tube down the Guadalupe River, and you want to go downstream, what do you need to do? The answer is you don't need to do anything. You just stay there and float. And the way the natural current will take you downstream naturally. That's just how it goes. And then if you want to go upstream, what do you need to do? Well, you need to work hard. You need to paddle as hard as you can and go upstream because you're going against the current. Okay, that makes sense. So when we talk about upstream and downstream disciplines, what that means is that there are upstream disciplines, and that means that they're harder for you to do. It's a discipline that you need to incorporate in your life every so often, and it's going to be hard. Okay, you're going to have to paddle really hard. You're going to have to work on it really hard. But then there's other disciplines that are downstream disciplines that are really natural for you to do. So I'm going to explain that in a little bit. So maybe if if you're type 1, I think I'm going to mention that in a little bit. What is that? Type 1. Oh yeah, type 1. Your downstream discipline is time in nature. You love to be outside and dwell on that and time in nature. So that's a downstream discipline that comes naturally to you. Whereas your upstream discipline is journaling, because you don't want to put that inner critic thoughts down on paper because it freaks you out, right? And I've also put the upstream discipline is Sabbath and also community. So those ones, maybe they're easy for you, maybe they're hard. Usually for type 1s, those are hard. And so we want to make sure that we're incorporating each and every one of ourselves. We can't just, I look at it as like skipping leg day, right? In the gym. We can't just be all bulk up here and like have a defined chest and big, biceps, but then skinny legs. You just look weird. In the spiritual life, people are going to notice that you're not working out in the areas that you need to work out, right? Those are the upstream disciplines. So I just wanted to mention that real quick. Okay, I've spent a lot of time on that. There's the river analogy. I should have showed you that picture. It's a roaring river. It's hard to go upstream, easier to go downstream. But there's sometimes where you need to go upstream in order to grow in your relationship with Jesus, right? Amen. Okay, so let's talk about those types real quick. Okay, let's talk about each and every one of those types. This is the meat of what we're going to talk about today. And let me just a quick little break. is if you're not already subscribed to our YouTube channel, you're watching it via YouTube Live. So go up and find the subscription button, click subscribe. It'll go in your feeds. That way it's easier to access and you get notifications each time we put out a new video. So there's a commercial break for you. Okay, oh man, hopefully my throat's gonna stay in tune here. Okay, so let's talk about each of the 9 types. All right, let's get into it. Let's talk about the type 8. Type 8. All right, the challenger. As you can see, I'm gonna get into what's on the screen in a little bit. Okay, but a lot of what we're gonna be referring to is on page 2 of that spreadsheet. So go ahead and open up to page 2 of that spreadsheet. It's in the video description here below. If you're watching on fortresschurch.online, it's going to be below this video. So check out those resources. It's going to be there. All right. So type 8, we have to look at a couple of things. I'm going to mention what's on the screen in a little bit, but a couple of things here. Type 8, the main attribute that we want to talk about is that is integrated with the type 8 is power. Power. Now, power isn't necessarily a bad thing, right? Power can be a good thing. But 8s show us that God will fight on behalf of his people for their good. At their best, 8s fight for justice, for the oppressed, and defend the weak. They are direct, loyal, energetic, and protective. All right, so the basic desire for them, as you can see in the charts there, is to protect themselves. That's the basic desire, to protect themselves. The basic fear is being harmed, violated, or controlled. Don't want to be controlled at all. They have an innate survival instinct woven into their DNA, and they are people of very high intensity and strongly held opinions. Strongly held opinions, okay? So I'm not gonna go over everything in the spreadsheet, but if you want to, later on you can go through each one. Also, if you're not a type 8, please try your best not to tune out, especially if you're a type 7. You're gonna want to tune out on all these because you're gonna be the last one. But I assure you, learning about each of these types is gonna help you in your relationship with others. So if you can take notes, have your journal out and take notes about this. Maybe you could think of a type 8 in your life, and you wanna work with them on different things or help them in their spiritual disciplines and that'd be a great thing to do. Okay. So like I said, they have basic desires, basic fears. Let's talk about this. Their vices and sins. Okay. Or I put vice and sin in the same thing. It's synonymous. Okay. A vice is a sin. And then we're going to talk about virtues or graces given. Okay, the different words for it. I like the phraseology, like talking about sin, because that's like essentially what it is. It's a sin pattern that 8s naturally go towards. It's not that they don't have any other sin besides this one. No. Everyone, we all identify with each of the sins of every Enneagram type, right? It's just that one of them is going to be more profound than the others. And usually with a type 8, their vice or their sin is lust, but not simply sexual lust, but lust for everything that makes them feel alive. This is ironic because the behaviors of the 8, the behaviors that the 8 clings to, rather, are often self-destructive behaviors and addictions that give them the illusion of being in control and protected, even while destroying the world around them. Okay, so again, it's not the lust necessarily. Sometimes it is a sexual kind of lust, but it's more of a lust for that. Again, that power makes them feel alive when they challenge people, when they're in debates. Right? It gives them invigorated. It's like, yeah, I want this, right? But we need to be careful with that. As an 8, the virtue or the grace given is innocence. For the 8, this is the ability to rest from the constant pursuit of lust and settle into the moment, allowing life to come at them with childlike love and curiosity. When 8s embrace innocence, they find that in God they are protected and can then offer this protection to others. So that's the virtue there. So if you get that innocence portion, the type 8, think about it from this perspective, is You want to go back to your childhood if you're a type 8. You want to go back to that type of innocence, to where like I said, the childlike love and curiosity. You're trying to release your inner child, but here's the thing: is that doesn't do well because type 8s like to control things, and children usually don't control things. So type 8s need to pick themselves up by the bootstraps and be an adult, right? But for a type 8, you got to try to look at your childlike love and instincts, okay? So here's a couple of things. This is on the screen now. For spiritual disciplines on the spiritual side, growing in your relationship with the Lord. This is what I want you to do. In each of these things, each of these types, there's a core narrative, a memory passage, a downstream discipline, and an upstream discipline. Okay, so these are very important, and I need you to write these down, especially for your type. Okay, so the core narrative is the Syrophoenician woman. Now, core narrative, I'm using a biblical passage, either a Bible character or a Bible story or a Bible passage or a book of the Bible, something in the Bible that we could look to and understand for a little bit, right? So the core narrative of type 8 is the Syrophoenician woman, or the Canaanite woman in Mark chapter 7, verses 24 through 30. I know my head is cutting off that portion. It's Mark chapter 7, 24 through 30. Okay, I'm not going to go into each and every type of these core narratives and memory passages and things like that. But I want you, this is your homework, guys, is you're going to study each of these things, okay? So type 8, you're going to study Mark 7, 24 through 30, okay? And your memory passage that you need to memorize and keep instilled in you is Proverbs 3:5. Okay, let's talk about the downstream and upstream disciplines. The downstream discipline, which is a little bit easier for you to do as a type 8, is service projects. Type 8s love to serve because they feel connected to God when they serve others and other people. And just like the type 2 who loves to serve and help people, type 8s are different in that instead of maybe a type 2 would help a homeless person by giving them money and feeding them, clothing them, things like that. 8s would probably do some similar things. But a type 8 is a leader. They look at the institutional problem. So to help that homeless person, type 8 is going to run for office, right? He's going to talk to people and challenge people to give money to the homeless. You know what I mean? That's what the type 8 is going to do. So service projects, being in fact the leader of the service projects, can help them as a downstream discipline because they love to do those things. Now, there are upstream disciplines that are harder for type 8s to do, but you shouldn't push them off. You should go towards them with full head of steam and incorporate them into your calendar. One of the upstream disciplines is accountability. You need to tell people, as a type 8, you need to tell people, hey, these are my downfalls. These are my sins. And I have no control over it. I need you to help me navigate these waters. I don't want to be in control and feel like I need to do things on myself. So can you help me, right? That's accountability. Going to someone and saying, you have the ability to step into my life. And if I'm, stepping on toes and if I'm being a jerk to people, I want you to tell me because sometimes I can't understand that, right? So that's accountability. You need to have an accountable person in your life to do that. Also, submission. Type 8s are natural leaders and feel uncomfortable when they are not in the leadership position. So that's why you need to submit to authority. Have someone in authority over you, whether it be a pastor, professor, mentor, whatever, who could speak life into you and to speak to you and to tell you what you need to do next, how you should go about life. The next upstream discipline is asking for forgiveness. This is a really hard thing for the 8 to do, is ask for forgiveness. But hey, I don't, hopefully you understand maybe more of the type 8, but this is something that type 8s need to do very regularly. It's going to be really hard, but I hope you understand that. I so apologize for my throat. Man, I didn't know it was going to be this bad. Man, I promise I'll let you guys know if I have the coronavirus, but I'm pretty sure I don't. Is that not a good joke? Maybe I'm kind of for real about that. Okay, cool. Awesome. Okay, if you have any comments about that, just leave them below. I'm going to go back and forth between those. So hopefully you do that. If you have any questions about the type 8, put it in the comments right now. I know there's a little bit of a lag, but I'm just going to keep going. And then I'm gonna stop and talk about those things, okay? We're gonna get into some more questions later. I don't have a whole lot of questions in this one, but here's the type 9. Okay, anybody identify with the type 9? Type 9, they're called peacemakers because they are devoted to both internal and external peace for themselves and others. The main attribute is peace. 9s reflect God's peace that surpasses all understanding, and they create peace around them for others to rest in. They're described as generous, patient, emphatic, and receptive. Basic fear is to feel peace and wholeness. Did I say fear? Basic desire is to feel peace and wholeness. That's not a fear. Basic fear, okay, is loss and separation. 9s living out the false self or an unhealthy self will often feel an intense need to keep peace and harmony, but they will do this by ignoring their own needs and feelings and instead simply try to go with what everyone else wants. Because of their natural ability to see every perspective when conflict arises, they are often unable to take a stance or choose a side. So that's probably the negative attributes of a peacemaker if they're not in a healthy attitude, right? Can't make decisions, can't lean on them to do that, get frustrated, right? Because of the indecisiveness. Okay, a couple more things. Their vice or their sin is slothfulness or laziness, meaning that they often become neglectful of or slow to confront their own feelings, emotions, or needs. 9s often struggle to recognize this because they believe that if the outer world looks peaceful, the inner one is too. But in reality, their feelings are still there. They've simply put them in a pretty box in order to ignore them. So, don't be lazy, type 9s. And not necessarily that they are procrastinators, even though type 9s may be a lot of procrastinating, do a lot of procrastination. You need to be very careful in that, right? That's a sin pattern that we need to watch out for as a type 9. The virtue or the grace given is action, right? So if a type 9 is healthy, they take action on things. They make decisions. They help others around them and don't just go off to the sidelines, but intervene, kind of more like a type 8, right? This allows a 9 to start creating genuine peace in the inner and outer world through the honest expression of their feelings and emotions. Action for type 9s means giving themselves space to take action and speak their opinion, even in tension. It is there that true peace is found. So it's a false self or false assumption that if you say, well, in order to make peace, I'm just going to make everyone happy and just be on the sidelines and just say, hey, everyone get together and be nice. But if you're type 8, you know this, but if you're type 9, you usually don't. That you need to step in sometimes, and you need to go into that and understand that you need to make decisions and kind of beat people up in a sense, not really in that sense, but kind of take action in that sense. Okay. A couple of things that I want to mention too. I forgot to do this in type 8. Is looking at childhood wounds, okay? So, sorry about this. Let me go back to the type 8 real quick. Sorry, I forgot to mention this. But let's talk about the childhood wound of the type 8s, okay? 8s grew up in a highly chaotic, dysfunctional, and physically or emotionally unsafe environment where they had to mature very quickly to protect themselves. Instead of being controlled, 8s decided that they would always be in control and refused to show weakness because weakness made them vulnerable. Now, all because we have, these childhood wounds doesn't necessarily mean that everyone identifies with these childhood wounds. Maybe it's emotional. Maybe these things actually happen to you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they happen to you to a T. It's just giving a generality to get, people understanding kind of what 8s go through in a sense, and maybe their childhood helps them, develop into a type 8 because of what happened in their childhood. Okay, so that's the type 8. So going back to the type 9, sorry, I'm flipping back and forth. I forgot to mention the childhood wounds. Childhood wounds for a 9 is the 9s grew up in an environment where they felt overlooked, lost, or unimportant. When they did not, or when they did have strong feelings, they were ignored or criticized. So they chose to simply blend in and go with the flow to keep the peace around them. That's just what they naturally go towards because of what happened in the childhood, right? So for the peacemaker, here's some spiritual disciplines and things we need to understand. The core narrative in the Bible is Abraham. This is a Bible character in Genesis 12 through 22. 12 through 22. I think that you need to understand and study Abraham this week. Study Abraham because he is a type 9. You'll see how he makes poor decisions, or rather, he doesn't make decisions at all. He's just like, whatever. You could have my wife. You do this, whatever. If you know the story of Abraham, you know what I'm talking about. But if you don't, go ahead and check him out. Genesis 12 through 22. The memory passage that you need to memorize is Joshua 1, 8 through 9. Okay? The downstream discipline for a type 9 is time in nature and silence and solitude. Type 9s are peaceful, right? So they love to be outside in nature, kind of, just like the type 1s we're going to talk about later. Next. Sorry if you hear my dog barking at something. But that's time in nature, and silence and solitude is also a downstream discipline. It's natural for them to do and go towards, to be silent, to be in solitude and like that, even though maybe some elements may be hard, and we'll talk about that later. The upstream discipline is fixed hour prayer, okay, and confronting injustice. So if you don't know what fixed hour prayer is, how about you go ahead and Google it? Just go ahead and Google it. What is fixed hour prayer if you're a type 9? And go ahead and practice that and do that. So that way you're in a mode. You're not just lazy and because usually type 9s are a bit lazy and slothful in prayer. They're just like, I want to pray for, it's been 5 minutes. That's good enough, whatever. But no, having a fixed hour prayer time with no distractions, with no laziness, you need to practice that. Another thing for type 9s is confronting injustice. That's right. That's a spiritual discipline. If you see injustice happening in your world, you need to have the ability to confront it and not just stand on the sidelines, not making a decision, right? And that's what type 9s kind of do. So that's an upstream discipline you need to do. A couple of comments here. Cool. Let's see. Let's see. You're asking about in the spreadsheet. Is it incorrect? I updated the spreadsheet. If you didn't get the new one, I updated it like a few hours ago because I made some changes on it. So hopefully you have the right one. But felt controlled and had to mature too soon. I think that describes actually the type 8. Of course, like I said, maybe you identify with this as a type 1 too. That some type 1s identify with that as well. I guess that describes them too, unless you're talking about somebody else. But let's get on to other ones, okay? All right. So that's type 9. Let's go to the type 1. And again, if you have any questions, put it in the comments. I'll go back to them. I know there's a little bit of a lag. All right, so sorry about this cough again. I feel embarrassed a little bit. Okay, type 1. Type 1s are called the reformers or the perfectionists, okay, because of the ability to see what's wrong in the world and make it better. By doing so, they are often bringing God's restoration, even in little ways, to the world around them. The main attribute that is for a reformer, a type 1, is goodness. 1s remind us that God is always working to bring his perfect kingdom to earth, when all that is broken will be made right. 1s want to be good and are therefore perfectionistic, principled, and improvers. Their basic desire is to reveal the ideal goodness in themselves and in the world around them. Their basic fear is that they are corrupted, bad, and immoral. When 1s move away from a place of security. They start acting primarily out of the belief that they are corrupted and are consumed with the shame of their own brokenness and inability to be good. Their vice or their sin is anger, which they direct toward all the imperfections in the world. But that external anger is soon directed inward at themselves. And if ones aren't careful, they can easily fall into a game of never-ending self-improvement, only to find that they fall short of their own unrealistic expectations time and time again. If you're type 1, you identify with that, right? The virtue, or the opposite side, instead of the sin pattern, right? The virtue or the grace given is serenity in the grace given to ones. Serenity is the grace given to ones. In ones, as soon as they learn to accept themselves and the world around them as good enough, then the serenity allows ones to let go of their need to constantly improve and to simply rest in the divine presence of God. Okay, that's the virtue of the grace given for ones. The childhood wound is this. As children, ones got the message that they weren't good enough and that they needed to always be better. They were told that they could always be better in every way, making the refrain in their head one of a constant critique of their outer and inner worlds. Okay, that's the childhood wound. Again, with the childhood wounds, I'm very careful with that. I don't want to, another thing about the childhood wounds, because maybe as a parent, you look at your child who's a particular type, and you may think like, oh my gosh, I wounded my child in this way, and blah, blah. I'm so, no, don't look at it like that. Some of these childhood wounds, parents are active in. So they actually, maybe it was like abusive or, verbally, physically, whatever, or different ways, maybe neglectful. We're talking about that. Maybe it was active, but honestly, most of the time it's passive parenting, in my opinion. It's one of the things like you don't really realize these things, and not even your children realize this. Not even your kids realize that what's going on. Maybe it was just one time, that was there. As for a type 1, they got the message that they weren't good enough, and they always need to be better. Maybe it's like just one time, and that was a trigger that was a childhood wound for them. And we all make mistakes, but it's not. Don't blame the parents for childhood wounds. Sometimes it needs to be blamed, but not like most of the time. It's not. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I want to preface that with that. So let's talk about disciplines. The spiritual side of type 1 for the perfectionist or reformer. The core narrative is the Apostle Paul. It's the character of Paul. In Acts chapter 8 through 28, so pretty much like a large chunk of Acts, and also the epistles that Paul wrote. If you look through the New Testament, you'll see which epistles or letters that Paul wrote. As you look through that, you realize maybe Paul was a type 1, and of course we're making assumptions, but you get to learn from him and how his perfectionistic and pharisaical upbringing helped him actually, hindered his relationship with God at first, but then helped him in the end, right? So look at that. And then also the memory passage that you need to memorize is Matthew 19:26. The downstream discipline is time in nature. Type 1s love to, usually love to be in nature, love to be outside, because usually that's one thing that is almost perfect and in their eyes is nature. Upstream disciplines, here's a couple of things. It's journaling. It's a little bit hard for type 1s to journal, mainly because they don't want to repeat their inner critic or what's going on in their head. It's a little bit harder for them to do that. Once they put it on paper, they don't like what they hear, right? They don't like that. But we need to do that so that way we put our thoughts and feelings on paper. Excuse me. I'm so sorry. Man. Another upstream discipline is Sabbath. Because type 1s are very, they have a long to-do list. They want to get things at it and make things perfect. And their to-do list is unending. They don't rest really well. And so one of the things you need to learn as Sabbath is to rest Take a 24-hour period every week, or very regularly in the day, or whatever you Sabbath, and rest and forget about your to-do list, put it on the side, and just truly rest. I would encourage upstream disciplines for that, for one. Also, community. You need community because you need other people feeding into you. And let me just say a positive community, right? A community that could encourage you and uplift you and inspire you in that way, to get rid of that inner critic in your head, right? So that's the type 1. Let me look at the comments if there's any questions. Okay, cool. I don't see any. Awesome. Let's look at the type 2. How are y'all doing, by the way? Y'all doing pretty good? I know we're getting there. We're almost there. I know it's been a while now, but we're almost. Well, not really. We just got started. But hey, let's keep going. Type 2 is called the helper because they excel at anticipating and meeting others' physical and emotional needs. The main attribute is love. 2s remind us that God is love and that He is a God who will give all of Himself to bring us into a loving relationship with Him. In this same way, 2s will give all of themselves to love those around them, and they are emphatic, generous, and nurturing. The basic desire for type 2s is to be loved. They just want to be loved. Now, we all desire, right, to be loved, but 2s feel the need to be loved by others more deeply than any other type. Their basic fear is that they're unloved. For the false self, or the unhealthy side of 2s, tell them that they need love from all other places except God. 2s were told that they would love, or rather, 2s were told that they would be loved if they loved others rather than themselves. As a result, when 2s feel in love, they will do anything to feel love. The vice or sin is pride. Now, this is actually pretty interesting because type 2s are the most humble people on the Enneagram scale. For every Enneagram type, they're the most humble. But their sin or their vice is pride. That's pretty interesting. Unhealthy 2s may feel addicted to how others like their giving and their caring nature, and could feel pride that they are needed and loved for what they do. If 2s feel unloved, they may even manipulate others to feel love. So that it's almost like a false humility that is portrayed, right? If you're unhealthy 2, right? If that's your sin pattern, is pride. In other words, the reason why you help others and minister to others and do other things like that, the only reason, if you're unhealthy 2, is to get the praise and admiration or respect or love from others. That's pretty prideful, right? That's actually selfish. So that's something as a type 2. I mean, people can't really call you on that. So as a type 2, you need to have that inner dialogue within yourself and understand, wait, why am I doing this? Am I doing this for myself, or to actually benefit, like intentionally help other people, right? The virtue or grace given is humility, meaning that they are able to recognize their own needs and are able to articulate them to others to avoid becoming lost in what others expect of them. When this happens, 2s are able to love freely without any expecting to find their value in the love of others. Type 2, their childhood wound is the 2s receive the message in their childhood that their needs were selfish. So instead of focusing on what they needed, 2s turned their gaze outward to the needs of those around them. By focusing on others, 2s felt loved even when that love wasn't given back. So one of the disciplines that we need to understand for a type 2 is just to take care of yourself. You know what I mean? Type 2s usually focus on other people and serving other people around them, that they even forget to do that. You're reminded of that. If you flew in an airplane recently and you know how it goes, they say, hey, if you have a child with you, just make sure you put on your oxygen mask, right? If the plane's going down, type 6 worst case scenarios, right? If you need the oxygen mask, put your own oxygen mask first, then put it on the child. And so as a type 2, you need to understand that. You need to understand that you need to help yourself first. Well, not in a selfish way, of course, but you need to understand that you can't help others if you're unhealthy. That's what I want to say. You can't help others and help them be healthy if you're not healthy. Yep, that's what you need to do. Let's talk about spiritual disciplines. The core narrative is the parable of the sheep and goats. I know my face is blocking this. The parable of the sheep and goats in Matthew 25:31-46. Study that parable, study it again, meditate on it, and then study it again and meditate on it again. Okay? Pray through it. The memory passage is Matthew 7:11. Memorize that. The downstream discipline that they have is hospitality and service projects. Of course, right? Type 2s love to be hospitable. They love serving people, inviting people into their home, making sure they feel welcome. Service projects. They want to do that. They love serving other people. But the upstream disciplines is centering prayer and fasting, right? Centering prayer is a more liturgical way of praying. If you don't know what that is, just go ahead and Google that. I'm actually experimenting with that, so I'm learning how to do this myself. I shouldn't be the one who's talking about it because I know very little of it. But one of the other things that I think twos should do is fast as an upstream discipline. It's a little bit harder for them to do, mainly because type 2s in fasting, if you do it correctly, no one else is supposed to know you're fasting, right? No one else is supposed to know that. And for type 2s, since they're very more self-absorbing, they want to serve others and let other people know or whatever. That's a very outward type of thing. But in fasting, it's inward. Like, you're only supposed to know about that. And so that's why for type 2s, maybe it'll be a little bit harder for people who are type 2s to fast. Honestly, fasting should be an upstream discipline for everybody, but type 2s especially. All right, so that's the type 2. Maybe I should be going a little bit faster. I don't know what you guys think. Are y'all still with me? Cool. Hopefully you're taking good notes. I'm going to be asking some good questions later on, okay? Again, sorry for my cough. Type 3. Let's go to type 3. Type 3, they're called achievers because of the ability to accomplish and push others to accomplish great things, right? They are well regarded and value personal growth. So you type 3s probably love the Enneagram because they want personal growth, right? The main attribute is effectiveness. 3s remind us that God accomplishes and achieves all that he promised to his people. They are role models, authentic, and successful. The basic desire for a type 3 is to be valuable for who they are. The basic fear is that they are worthless and have nothing to offer the world. In order to chase their desire to be valuable, they work harder and faster than anyone around them. The vice or the sin is deceit. 3s want to look good all the time. They want others to see their success and value that is in them. If life starts shifting in a negative direction, 3s will smudge the truth and use deceit to keep up a facade of success. So I think stereotypically, I know this is not every 3, of course, but stereotypically I think of, that maybe that wannabe rapper, right, who in order to feel successful, he puts out an album, and in order to show everybody that he's successful, he goes and he rents, a really expensive car and gets people to think that he bought that car. But no, he really rented it for a couple days, just so people could think that he's rich and successful. So that's what a really, really unhealthy type 3 would do. So that's the deceit in there, right? You put on a facade, you say, look, everything's fine, everything's good. But really, type 3s need to open up. They are most disassociated with their feelings and the heart center, right? In the intelligence center, they're most disassociated with their own feelings, and 3s need to open up a little bit more. So the and what I mean by open up is tell the truth, right? Which goes into the virtue and grace given, which is truthfulness, right? Which allows 3s the freedom to take off their masks and be honest with everyone about the good, both the good and the bad. It's in this place of the vulnerable honesty that 3s can be truly valued simply for who they are and to cease the incessant need to impress. The childhood wound, as you could probably see for type 3s, is 3s received the message that the only thing that mattered for them growing up was their performance. They were only valued for what they could do, not for who they were. Now, again, I mentioned childhood wounds many times. I don't need to go through it even longer, but that would be for that. Okay, let's talk about spiritual disciplines for the type 3. The core narrative is King Saul in 1 Samuel. Go ahead and read that. Study him. Understand who he is. Yep, he turned out to be a bad guy, but not many people know that he was also a very godly man when he first started to be king. Understand the healthy side and unhealthy side of King Saul. Memory passage is 1 Corinthians 13:1. Downstream discipline is Bible study and learning. Type 3s love to improve, love to do that kind of stuff. And so that's going to be easy for them. Now, upstream disciplines, a couple of things. One is confession. Type 3s usually don't like to, like I said, open up and be truthful. But one of the things that you need to discipline yourself in is have an accountability partner, have maybe a couple of people to confess to. You know, the Bible says to confess your sins one to another. And in type 3s, you need to open up to somebody and say, look, this is where my downfall is, and this is where I'm not good at, this is where I fail at, and I just need to confess that. You know, it's just that. So confession is a spiritual discipline as an upstream for 3. Also, simplicity. Simplicity, if you don't know what that is, it's not really minimalistic, but simple. Jesus lived simply. He didn't have a lot of things. He didn't have a lot of possessions. In fact, he was a homeless prophet, king who, didn't have anywhere to lay his head. He was a homeless guy. So we need to be more simple in our approach. Look at your inventory, the things that you have that attribute success in your life. Donate it. Sell it. Just give it away. Don't sell it. Give it away. Give it to someone who needs it, or just get rid of it. Throw things away. You don't need that big house. You don't need maybe that corner office. You don't need those things. Just live more simply. That's an upstream discipline that type 3 should be associated with. Is that cool? Any other questions? I know that y'all are learning a lot, right? Learning through that. So let's go through. By the way, in your spreadsheet, you also see a couple more things. I'm not going to go to each and every one of them, but there's survival strategies. If you see that one, the lies that you believe, the truth that you need, right? I even list the fruit of the Spirit. The fruit of the Spirit is fruits of the Spirit that as your type you need to grow into, that you have lost, but you need that particular fruit of the Spirit, right? And also I mentioned the integration and disintegration. It shows you what you integrate to if you're healthy, and then what you disintegrate to when you're unhealthy. Okay, so again, those are those things. Okay, let's go back to the 4. After I take a water. All right, 4s are called individualists because of their ability to recognize and appreciate what makes everyone different. They are unique, appreciative of beauty, and good at facing their emotions. The main attribute is creative. 4s bear the image of God's extravagant creativity. They're described as sensitive, reserved, and unique. Their basic desire is to be their authentic selves. They want to be known, seen, and understood as individuals. The basic fear that type 4s have is having no significance. Vice, or the sin, is envy. Let me explain that. Because 4s view themselves as different and everyone else as normal, they may think that they are lacking that very thing that gives significance to life, right? 4s have the passion of envy, causing them to want and be jealous of the lives others are living. So maybe it's not like envy of possessions, right? It's almost like I'm envious of other people's lives, even though you're unique and not like the normal people, right? But you secretly, it's like you want the other people's lives that they're living. And this envy allows them to cope with their greatest fear of insignificance. Envy causes 4s to get stuck in a hamster wheel of emotions. I like that phraseology. The hamster wheel of emotions, making them feel trapped in their own feelings. The virtue, or the grace given, so the opposite side of their sin, is their I thought it's a uniqueness, right? Which is the ability to feel, or the equanimity, which is the ability to feel the appropriate emotion at the appropriate time. So it's okay that type 4s are emotional. It depends on the discernment of those emotions. You need to have a certain emotion for each type, right? Or for each situation, rather. This grace allows the 4 to be honest about an experience without getting trapped in an emotional vortex. Excuse me. It is in this that a place of calmness and contemplation that 4s are able to see their own significance and value in Christ. The childhood wound. As children, 4s felt isolated or unseen by one or both of their parents because they felt different or misunderstood. To deal with the sense of isolation, 4s turned inward to their own feelings and imagination. Man, excuse me, my throat. Oh, man. Apologize for that. So let's get into spiritual disciplines. Core narrative is Job. Just read the book of Job. Look at how emotional he is, but also how he handles and manages his emotions, right? The memory passage is Deuteronomy 6:4. The downstream discipline, or one of them, a couple of them, is solitude, silence, and journaling. Usually for type 4s, it's a little bit easier for you to be solitude and by yourself. You're used to that. You're also used to being silent. You could do that in meditative things. Maybe you're also used to journaling. As a creative person, you want to put your thoughts to pen and paper, right? But the upstream discipline, a couple of things, is feasting, community, and celebration. 4s get down in the dumps a lot if they're unhealthy, right? If they're really unhealthy, they get down in the dumps. They just feel unvalued, right? They feel, and sometimes they don't even know how to deal with their own feelings, right? And so they need to learn how to celebrate and to rejoice with friends and community. That's right. If you didn't know, a spiritual discipline is eating. That's a spiritual discipline. And being in community and celebrating. Those are spiritual disciplines. So I think those are really important for the type 4 to understand. Don't just be down in the dumps all the time, just being secluded to yourself and in your own emotions and feelings. No, get out of your room, your hole of despair, right? And go out and have fun. Eat a good meal with people. Laugh, have fun, celebrate, use your emotions well. So that's the type 4. That's the type 4. Let's go to the type 5. 5s are called investigators because they're curious about the world around them and want to know why things are the way they are. Because of this, they're often innovative, independent, and highly focused. The main attribute is wisdom. 5s follow in the footsteps of the Proverbs, reminding us that God is wise and that wisdom is a true gift to be pursued. They are perceptive, intense thinkers, and analytical. Their basic desire is to be capable and competent. That's a big one, to be capable and competent. Competency is everything, right? Knowledge is everything. The basic fear is being left unable, is being left unable and helpless, right? To combat this fear of being unable and helpless, and to combat this fear and have some semblance of reaching for their desire, 5s withdraw from the outer world and live in their minds, studying the world around them intensely to find problems and solutions through knowledge and training and learning. Their vice, or their sin, is avarice, which is greed, if you don't know what that word is. And it's a type of greed characterized by hoarding and an inability to let go. So it's not necessarily like hoarding finances, which we usually associate with greed or possessions. It's actually hoarding, like intellectual hoarding. For the 5, this looks like hoarding of the mind, intellectual hoarding, than rather physical accumulation. 5s living out their false selves or their unhealthy selves will attempt to build self-competence, right? This is why if you ask someone if you ask a 5 a question, they're gonna be like, "Well, I'll think about it and I'll get back to you," and they really will think about it, and they really will research, and they will get back to you. Whereas the type 9, they'll be like, "Okay, I'll get back to you," and they forget about it, right? That's the laziness of the type 9. But the type 5, they really will get back to you because they want to think about it. But the virtue, the grace given, is detachment. This often has negative connotations. Detachment. It's like, what? That's a good thing. But for the 5, detachment is the thing that helps them let go of the endless journey deep into the mind and allows them the freedom to reattach to the world around them through offering their wells of wisdom to others as a beautiful gift. So that's why the sin of the type 5 is avarice or greed. They hoard information. And what we need for you type 5s is to teach us. You know a lot of things. You've researched. You've done your knowledge. You've done your education. You maybe about the Bible, maybe about certain things, whatever. You've thought through these things. Don't just hoard that information. Share it with other people, right? And so that's how you can do that. In the childhood wound for the type 5, in childhood 5s either struggled to make a meaningful connection with their caretaker, or they had helicopter caretakers who were intrusive and over-controlling. The 5 thus retreated into the world of the mind for safety, finding a place to truly explore the world without invasion. So, in other words, type 5s, what you experience right now in this quarantine in San Antonio, type 5s live in that every day, right? Type 5s are like, what's the deal? I love this is like my life. I love being in quarantine. I love just being on the internet and researching things and reading books and just being in myself, right? That's a type 5, thinking through those things, being secluded. So type 5, maybe you're like, I love this quarantine idea. We should keep doing it. That's naturally where we go to. Whereas type 7s are like, get me out of here, right? Or type 3 too. All right, so the core narrative. Let's get to spiritual side of it. The core narrative is Nicodemus. I need you guys, if you're type 5, to study Nicodemus in John chapter 3. Who is he? What is his vocation? How is he talking to Jesus? What kind of phraseology is he using? Understand that. Memory passage is Hebrews 11:32 through 40. Downstream disciplines, they love inductive Bible study. They love to do that. Let's study like the Old Testament Hebrew mumbo jumbo. Like they love to do that stuff. They love that knowledge, right? And downstream discipline is also solitude, being to themselves. Solitude is a spiritual gift, right? Or a spiritual discipline. The upstream discipline for type 5 is regular service projects. Get out of your comfort zone. Stop just getting in all that knowledge, right? And actually do something with your knowledge. Put your theology into practice is what I would say. Because usually type 5s are good into theology and apologetics and studying all that. That's good that you know that, but what's the use if you never practice your theology? So you have practical theology for type 5. Also confession. They usually are to themselves. They usually don't open up too much, not because they don't want to. And honestly, type 5 would be like, oh, I open up a lot, but they need to open up more and confess a few things more than other types would. And so that's what I would say for a type 5. Cool. I think you guys are doing good. Just looking at the chat, seeing if y'all have any questions. See that y'all are just intently studying, right? Intently writing some notes. Okay. This is my favorite type 6. You know why? It's because I'm a type 6. Type 6, they're called the loyalists because people of this type are not only fiercely loyal to relationships, but also to ideas and beliefs, even to the point that they will defend others of their values more fiercely than they will defend themselves. Main attribute for the type 6 is faithful, being faithful. 6s remind us that God is faithful and will not abandon his people. They reflect the radicalness of God's never-ending commitment to us. 6s are likable, warm, and charming. Am I likable, Jessica? Warm and charming? Likable, warm, and charming? She's in another room. I don't know. Maybe y'all think I am. Anyways. Okay, the basic desire is to be supported and have guidance. Okay, that's so important for a type 6 to be supported and have guidance. That's why type 6s usually aren't in leadership positions. I mean, they can. It's not that they can't be a leader. They can be a leader. I'm a leader in some areas. But honestly, I'd rather be led as a type 6, but have good, solid guidance, a good leader in front of me, right? Because if I don't, then it's down a bad trail, right? The basic fear for a type 6 is to be without any support or guidance. When 6s live out the false self or the unhealthy self, their mind becomes filled with worst case scenarios in which they are left helpless and without safety or support. So think worst case scenarios, always looking for exit signs. Okay, what's plan A? What's plan B? We know plan A because type 1s already figured out what plan A and B is. I want to know what plan C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P is, right? We need to have exit case scenario, worst case scenario for everything. At least think about it, right? And that's me. And then okay, so their vice or the sin is cowardice. Meaning the false self tells them that in order to be supported and have guidance, they must live in constant crippling fear, which eventually prevents them from making any decisions or moving forward with life. So in other words, I think one of your documents, maybe I didn't put it on here. It's either cowardice or fear for, let me just look at it. Oh yeah, fear. Okay, I put it on the thing. Cowardice, it's the same thing. I interchanged some synonyms, right? Fear is the sin pattern. Now, fear isn't like listed as a sin technically, but in this sense, it is, right? In this sense, it is because we look at it as like it's almost like you're not trusting, right? You're not trusting in the Lord, so you turn to other idols as a type 6. To put your trust in, but those won't sustain you, and that's idolatry, which is sin, right? So everything falls back on that. The virtue or grace given is courage. In spite of their fear, healthy 6s find that they have the courage to act and move through life with a sense of confident courage, knowing that they have the guidance and security they are seeking in God, who is their safety. The childhood wound. As children, 6s learn to be doubtful of the world around them because their environments were unpredictable and unsafe. They doubted everything as a defense mechanism and eventually learned not to even trust their own thoughts or instincts. So, as a type 6, maybe you are a type 6, or maybe you're married to a type 6, or maybe you have kids or parents who are type 6, family members. One of the things that you need to understand is we look to relationships as a pretty big deal. We look to to doubt, and that's why we're called the questioner, right? We doubt everything. We're the skeptic. We look at things and we ask good questions. Usually, I think I do too. We ask questions in order to grow, but if you don't ask the right questions, then it leads to fear, right? And so as a questioner, it's okay to ask questions, but will those questions lead to fear, right? And some of those things you ask God, some deep questions that you have, and maybe you'd never get those questions answered. That's the faithfulness aspect of the 6, to keep going, right? So let's look at the spiritual aspect of it. The core narrative of a type 6 is Peter walking on the water. You've read that story in Matthew chapter 14, verse 22 through 33. Maybe you've heard of it. Peter is full of fear, but he walks out on the water. And so as Pastor Randy Sean talked about this this past Sunday in the live stream, actually, as Peter is walking on the water, and as Pastor Randy Sean talked about not being afraid. I mean, type 6s, especially during this pandemic, we are very fearful during this time, right? We usually we're filled with anxiety because we don't have that plan, the plan that's going in place. But if you do have, backup plans and things like that, you feel more 7. The downstream disciplines is worship through song and journaling. Usually, type 6s love to worship through song. It helps them calm their fears. It helps them be less anxious, right? It's worship through music just calms, and usually it calms everybody, right? Everyone loves that, but more so for a type 6. This is a downstream discipline, easy for them to do. Also journaling, it's just a little bit easier to put things down on paper. It's almost like you're planning, right? As you're talking about your feelings and you're journaling, you're almost planning your emotions. And usually type 6s are also pretty good planners for that, okay? Upstream disciplines that maybe is really hard, and I tested this, is scripture memory. Man, it is so hard to memorize scripture for me. But I will not use that as a crutch. We talked about that last week. Don't use your Enneagram type as a crutch. All because I'm bad at scripture memory doesn't mean that I can't just say that that's what I am. No. I'm going to get better. I've looked at Spotify playlists that talk about that say the scripture memory back to me. I have the Dwell app, which has memory verses on repeat, so I can memorize them. Right, taking practices to do that. Also, community. Type 6s need community to have other people speak into their lives and say, hey, type 6, you're freaking out too much. You need to calm down, right? That's an insignificant fear. Why are you being anxious about that? That's something that you shouldn't be anxious about, right? We need community to enter in and tell us that we shouldn't be afraid. So community is an upstream discipline. It's hard to hear that because you're like, well, what if this? What if that? What if that? And you just need to listen and just dwell in community, right? Community helps you with that. All right. Any other? Last one for the type 7. We're in the last home stretch. All right. All right. I see Shauna say that sharing the worksheet link. Let me look at these. When I put download these, oh yeah, it's not working. That's weird. Let's see here. Yeah, I'm sorry. I guess the worksheet isn't working for you guys. I just made a couple adjustments. You guys could follow along with me. I don't think I made too many adjustments, so sorry about that. I'll update that later. But yeah, let's just keep going. We're on the last one, type 7. The enthusiasts. They're called enthusiasts because they are excited about almost anything. They approach the world with a kind of wide-eyed wonder, anticipating all the exciting things that are coming next. The main attribute is joy. 7s have a natural propensity towards joy, and they remind each of us that God gives joy in all of life's circumstances. 7s are known to be energetic, lively, and spontaneous. Their basic desire is to be satisfied. Basic fear is pain, right? They crave a life of deep-rooted satisfaction. So when 7s live out the false self, their lives become filled with more and more distractions in search of that satisfaction, causing them to look distracted, manic, and unfocused. Vice or sin pattern is gluttony. Now, not necessarily that all 7s are obese or anything like that. No. Not that it's usually about food. It's usually 7s tend to overconsume anything that brings satisfaction. So it doesn't have to be food. It could be experiences. It could be even going into addiction like alcohol. That's why type 7s are most prone to be addicted to things, pornography, alcohol, things, just anything like that, because they want satisfaction. It's the vice or sin pattern, right? But they find that their unquenchable thirst and unending pursuits leave them burnt out and anxious for more. Doesn't lead to lasting growth, right? The virtue or the grace given, if a 7 is healthy, their virtue is sobriety. Healthy 7s are able to calm the chaos buzzing in their minds and are able to invest in the here and now. In this sobriety, 7s can find great wisdom and offer that wisdom to others. The childhood wound is 7s either had a nurturer that was taken away too soon, or they were deprived of a nurturing relationship altogether. To cope with the pain in their lives, 7s learn to distract themselves with constant positive thinking and fun activities. That's why type 7s are probably the most optimistic out of all the Enneagram types. They look at the positive side of things. That's great. But sometimes if they're unhealthy, they look at the positivity almost as a crutch and just saying, everything's going to get better, everything's going to get better, just to distract themselves that everything around them is falling apart, right? So that's why type 7s, also, one of the, sorry, I can't talk. In one of the videos that I put in if you're watching on the website, just scroll down, you'll see one of the videos. What was it? Oh yeah, Enneagram types in quarantine. Did anyone look at that one? Oh my gosh, it's so funny. It shows each of the Enneagram types with how they would respond in quarantine. Go check that out after this video. It's so funny. It's so funny. So go ahead and look through that after this video. And I enjoyed how they talked about the type 7. But so that was the childhood wound there. Let's talk about some spiritual disciplines for type 7. They're called the enthusiast, right? And the core narrative is Solomon in 1 Kings. So if you want to learn more about your type, research Solomon, go to him. 1 Kings. And by the way, you're probably really anxious. You've been waiting around, right? Because enthusiast type 7, you're like, come on, get to me, and I put 7s as last because I'm starting with the 8, and so I'm sorry, type 7s, but if you made it this far, that means you're a little bit more healthy of a type 7 because you didn't tune out. So I'm glad that you're still tuned in. But the memory passage for you is Ecclesiastes 3:1. Downstream disciplines is feasting and celebration. You love to do that. You love to celebrate and enjoy life, enjoy having a good meal, having experiences. Those are spiritual disciplines. But it could lead to gluttony and those things, so please be careful with that, right? Also, there's upstream disciplines that is a little bit harder to do. I put solitude, silence, and abstinence. Solitude and silence are aspects of spiritual disciplines that 7s need incorporated into their lives. You need to have dedicated times where you're quiet before the Lord, you're alone, you're silent, and you're waiting for God to speak to you. And for type 7s, it's just really, really hard to do. But hey, that's why it's an upstream discipline. It's hard for you to do. You have to paddle harder, but that's what it is, right? You need to grow in that area. Also, abstinence. There are some things maybe in life that maybe God gives us as good graces, right? That aren't necessarily sin, like good experiences, good food, right? But you need to abstain from those things. Maybe it's fasting, right? Maybe it's so abstaining from food, right? But not just fasting in that aspect. Maybe it's getting off of of social media for a while. Maybe it's getting off of video games, things that satisfy you a lot, right? So abstaining from certain things in your life for spiritual growth. So that's a spiritual discipline for you there. All right, so I think that's pretty much it. I want to talk about, I'm going to skip over a couple of things. One of the questions I have for you, we're going to conclude in just a little bit, but one of the questions I have for you is which discipline, spiritual discipline that I listed out of all these, the upstream disciplines, challenges you the most? Because that may help you if you don't know what your type is. Maybe that'll help you realize what your type is, because it's one that challenges you the most. So share in the comments, what is one of the disciplines that challenges you the most? And I'm going to, let's see what I'm going to do. I'm going to skip a couple of these things. I had more things I wanted to share about different harmony triads. If you don't know what that is, it's a different type of triad in there. I don't have time to go through it, and honestly, it's not super important. It was just like additional information. A couple of quick things. Is let me skip through all of these. Okay, the wings. Each this is what makes everybody unique, right? If you look at the Enneagram, where is it? I didn't have it. Sorry, I'm going through the slides really fast. If you look at the Enneagram, there are, of course, 9 types, right? And going on each side of your type, there are two different numbers, one on the right side or one on the left side, or one on either side, right? So you could see here, if you want to write down maybe which one you lean towards. So maybe, so like for me, I'm a type 6 with a 5 wing. I'm more on the 5 wing. So I am the defender on here. And I know my face is blocking the 5 with a 6 wing. That's problem solver. That's what it says. But if you want to write down what your thing is, maybe you lean towards you have a primary type, right? But then you have a wing and that's what uniquely identifies with people. Because maybe you're like, man, I don't identify with the type 1 or the type 5 or with the type 4 in this area, but maybe it's because you're that type, like a type 4 with a 3 wing, right? Or a type 2 with a 1 wing, right? And so that helps you understand with the wings. Basically, wings are basically you borrow some of the attributes on the left or the right of you, on either side of you, that you borrow from to get you into a more unique pattern in space that kind of separates you from other people. So that way, that's why no type 6s are the same. We're all unique, and I know type 4s will hate when I say that we're all unique because they're the only ones who are unique. But whatever. But if you know kind of that aspect of the wings, then maybe that gives you some uniqueness in that. Maybe you don't identify with everything of a type 6. Maybe you identify with a type 5 like what I am. That's why I more tend towards the analytical side of things. I do a lot of research and store up information and knowledge, right? And I ask questions. So that's why I think I'm a type 6 with a 5 wing. And so maybe that's you. Maybe one of these describes you a little bit more because you don't want to just feel like tied in a box with that. Well, wings help you with that. So hopefully through this, you're able to see which wing that you have, or maybe you're just full on, what that type is, nothing else, that's great. But maybe you do have a wing. This is how you would identify that, okay, on either side of you. And then I mentioned with the other, no, I'm not going to go into that. Basically, it's an integration, disintegration type. I talked about the arrows. That's another part of it, right, to help you understand how you identify with all the other types. Okay, last thing, because this has to do with our current situation here. There's one of the authors of the Enneagram is this guy, Christopher Hortz. Hopefully you can see his book here. It's a Sacred Enneagram. He talks about a really important aspect that I thought was really interesting. He talks about some spiritual practices, and there's 3 of them that every type should participate in, and that's stillness, solitude, and silence. Let me just explain that real quick, and then we'll pray, and then I'll give you homework and stuff like that, and we'll conclude here. Okay, so stillness needs to be incorporated into the 8s, 9s, and 1s. Like all the disciplines, of course, but specifically stillness. Here's why. What happens when the body people simply stop? Because remember we talked about how the 8s, 9s, and 1s, they're all part of the body triad. Remember the intelligence center? The intelligence center, you're part of the body triad. So what happens when the gut, instinct, body people simply stop? Who are they without the good that they do? Stillness is a counterpoint to control, or stillness as a counterpoint brings control and towards freedom, right? This gift, because remember, stillness and solitude and silence and all these things, they're a gift, right? This gift refines the instinctive drive to do by creating interior accountability for proper engagement in their active life. So if you're an 8, 9, or 1, one of the things that you should do, especially during this quarantine time here in San Antonio and, being isolated and secluded, is being still before the Lord. Practicing that as an 8, 9, and 1, being still. What that means is you're not doing anything. You're not fulfilling a to-do list. You're not doing all these things, right? And being pragmatic in this. You're sitting before the Lord, and it may be counterintuitive. He's like, I'm not getting anything done. I'm not praying. I'm not doing these things, whatever. No. But you are in meditative prayer, in stillness, and you're saying, God, I want you to speak to me, right? Before I do anything else, before I go back to work, before I go back to school, before I do all these things, I need to hear from you first, right? And that's what 8s, 9s, and 1s need to do, especially during this time of quarantine. Stillness. 2s, 3s, and 4s, which is the heart triad, right? They need solitude. Who is the heart person when all alone? 2s, 3s, and 4s are very relational, right? And look to the emotional side of things. Solitude functions as a correction to the dependency on connection and comparison. This gift of solitude teaches us how to be present to God, to ourselves, and to others with no strings attached. Just be present. Just be alone, right? Don't do things for other people. Just be alone and silent, I'm gonna get into the silent part in a little bit. But for 2s and 4s, the solitude aspect needs to be there. There, you can reevaluate, because then you're not doing things for other people, right? It's not a emotional thing. Your solitude for your own sense of well-being, of growth, and security and safety. For the 5s, 6s, and 7s, which is the head type, the head intelligence center, you need silence, right? Is it possible for head people to turn down the inner noise to be able to really listen? Silence helps us listen to the people in our lives who speak living words of truth or affirmation over us, and it helps us listen to ourselves, our desires, and fears. This gift of silence helps us learn to listen to the voice of God in our lives, a voice we may have been unable to recognize before. We, as the head types, get in our heads too much, and we may like silence and the outer noise. It's mostly the inner noise that we need to be silent from. We need to say, nope, turn down the volume in my head, and let's listen to God, right? Turn down the volume, let's listen to God. I like this quote by Christopher Hortz of the Sacred Enneagram, that book. He says, when we give ourselves to contemplative practices, marked by solitude, silence, and stillness, our souls are nurtured, our virtues blossom, and our true self comes forward. I want to challenge you during this time, as you understand your type, is to practice stillness, solitude, and silence, especially, because we can't do anything else, right? And it's going to be really hard for some people to practice the stillness, especially for the 8s, 9s, and 1s, solitude for the 2s, 3s, and 4s, and silence for the 5s, 6s, and 7s, especially inner silence. And so that's my prayer for you guys this week, is during this time of quarantine, of being alone, maybe of having additional time, maybe for some people, to, instead of streaming, going on social media, checking those things out, instead you say, no, let's put that stuff away. Let's focus on reaching out to God, right? And so maybe that's you. So let's do this. Let's ask a couple of questions. Or let's answer a couple of questions, and we'll get going, okay? And we'll pray. I see that Streamline has the answer. The community discipline is hard. Community discipline, yep, that's right. So maybe, I forgot what type was struggling with community. We're type 1s and 6s, right? So whoever that is, yeah, community is a hard discipline, but you need to strive towards that. Oh, this is what that was. Sorry, I forgot. The body type, head type, heart type. There you go. Those are those things. Does anyone else have any questions about any of the Enneagram things? We're gonna, after this Q&A, we're gonna pray and close out. Hopefully you've learned something through all this, and hopefully you've learned more about yourself, but not necessarily just to learn more about yourself and just say, look how great I am. It's mostly, maybe it's about, it's external, right? We want to always go externally and say, okay, now that I know how God created me, and how I'm wired, the inner crevices of my hearts and my thoughts and my gut, my head, my heart, my gut. Now that I know more about this, how can I use this to make an impact in my community, in my church, in my workplace, and also in my relationship with God most of all, right? How can I start these? That's why I mentioned these practices that we should do in our lives to help us with that. So if any of you, again, have any questions, please leave that in the chat right now. If not, I'll go ahead and pray and end. Let me take some swig of water. Oh, man, again, I apologize, guys, for my throat. Man, hopefully I don't have the virus. Man, See, this is the type 6 of me. Oh, my gosh. I'm a type 6. I'm, getting a little scared. But I'll be okay. If I have it, I'll be okay. But as a type 6, that's kind of the fear and anxiety just kind of grips me a little bit. Mostly about other things. Man, you guys could be my therapy. I could sit here and talk about my type for hours, and what's in my head and things like that. That'd be really weird, and I'd probably be fired. So, yeah. All right. I know there's a little bit of a lag. So I don't see any more comments or anything. So it looks like y'all are good. So I think just, looking at a couple things through the Enneagram, if you remember from last week, this isn't a silver bullet, right? It's not something that if you just know a lot about the Enneagram, then you're going to grow and that's the only thing you need. No, you need other tools in your tool belt. You need to you're going to be on this journey for years to come. I mean, I'm young. How old am I? I'm 28. I'm only 28, and I have my whole life ahead of me. I'm going to be constantly learning, and so are you. No matter how old you are, you're going to be constantly learning about yourself through different aspects, not just the Enneagram, but other things. And so these practices, spiritual practices that I mentioned through each type, they're going to help you, and I know it's going to be hard, especially for the upstream disciplines. This is what I recommend. As you wrote down your upstream disciplines, get out your calendar, right? For type 1s, you already put it in your calendar probably. For type 6s, maybe you did too. But get out your calendar and put, the days and weeks that you're going to start practicing that. So for type 1s, your upstream discipline is Sabbath, right? So for type 1, hey, mark off a 24-hour period in the week and say, look, this is the time I'm going to rest and Sabbath. I'm going to put aside the to-do list. I'm going to turn off my phone. I'm going to turn off whatever you need to do for Sabbath and research about that, how to participate in that. Put it in your daily calendar, all those things. As a type 8, I think I put the upstream discipline is confession or accountability and submission. So text the person right now and say, hey man, can you be my accountability partner? Hey girl, can you be my accountability partner about some things? I want to open up to you about a couple of things. These are the things I'm struggling with. Start that process already. Meet with people that's going to help you be accountable. If you're type 1 and you don't have a journal, get a journal. If you're type 9, start putting the fixed hour prayer in your prayer life. These are the hours that I'm going to just do uninterrupted prayer. This time after school or this time whatever. Start putting that in your calendar. So all those things, just put it in your calendar. Start practicing those things right now. So I don't see any other questions here. Looks like maybe I'm just good at explaining things, so that's awesome. Don't have any questions. So I've already done it for a long period now, a long time. Let's go ahead and conclude. That concludes our Enneagram series. We have some special things coming up in the next couple weeks that we're going to let you know of. Make sure you're subscribed to this YouTube channel so that way you get the updates and videos to your inbox. Make sure you sign up for the email list. I mean, there's a lot of things that we want to keep you updated on, but we're working on that this week, and we'd love for you to participate in that. But let's go ahead and pray and conclude. And we know that Maybe God has done some great things in your life because of the Enneagram and which you've learned. So let's go ahead and pray. Wherever you're at, I'd like for you to bow your heads, close your eyes, and just agree with me in prayer. Jesus, thank you so much for teaching us some of these things. Maybe some of these things we learned about ourselves isn't sexy. It isn't like good, right? It isn't like, oh, we just don't like that feeling. We feel exposed. We feel embarrassed, Lord, by some of these things in our lives, our sin patterns that we feel called out on. But Lord, I pray that we wouldn't see it that way. I pray that we would look to it as an opportunity for growth. Lord, for some of us, we need to confess some things. For some of us, we need to be accountable. For some of us, we need to start writing things in our calendar, just start to practice many things, Lord. I pray that as we journey through this life, we wouldn't just do the things that we're good at, Lord. I pray that we would practice these upstream disciplines that are hard, that we need to paddle hard to get upstream because of growth, Lord. And so I pray that we wouldn't be afraid to do that. I pray that we'd help each other in community as a church through all these things. And if one of us is going astray, that we would lovingly call each other out on that and say, hey, we gotta go this way. And so I pray that you would help us navigate these waters of uncertainty in this time where we may not understand fully how you created us, Lord. I pray that in this journey, as we learn more about how you created us, that we would, Lord, just be patient through it, that we would learn to love the process and not get discouraged if we, take one step back, because we see that we've taken 2 steps forward throughout this process. And so we're making progress. And so, Lord, I pray that you give us patience and endurance through all this. Thank you, Jesus. I pray that you would be with us as a church, even during this quarantine time. God, I pray that we would look to this time as we are, in our homes and secluded, maybe alone or maybe just with family, that we would find that alone time to pray, to seek your face, Lord, to practice these spiritual disciplines, Lord, and not have an excuse for not doing that. I pray that this would be a time that it would be so intentional and so transformative in our spiritual growth, that we would look back at this, however long this quarantine is going to be, and look at this opportunity to say, man, I grew so much because of it. Yeah, this virus killed and destroyed many lives, but I learned and grew through it, and we saw the positivity behind it. So I pray that we would learn through it and grow through it, this difficult situation and process, Lord. Thank you so much. I pray that we would have a great day, great night, great week, and that you would just be with us, Lord. Thank you, Jesus. We love you. In your name we pray. Amen. All right, so glad that you're here joining us for these 2 weeks. Hopefully you learned something. I'm going to be signing off now. Wait, how do I do that? Anyways, I'll figure it out. But thank you guys for participating. Love y'all. Talk to you later.